Opposition leaders in Belarus have welcomed a decision by EU leaders to reject the results of the election that kept President Alexander Lukashenko in power. EU heads also announced sanctions against a large number of individuals involved in alleged voting fraud and violence against protesters.
This is not lunchtime or the end of a shift. This is another nail in the coffin of Lukashenko's credibility. Workers walk out of a state-run chemicals factory. Threats have no power over them anymore. Protesters urged workers at one of the country's famed tractor factories to join them, but some decided to keep their jobs. These miners were already outside at a rally. Across the industrial heartlands of Belarus, rejection of Lukashenko's regime has gone nationwide. And on Wednesday, that rejection officially went international, a clear message from the European Union.
We are ready to accompany peaceful democratic transition of power in Belarus.
Germany's Angela Merkel has spoken with Russia's Putin, but said Lukashenko wouldn't take her calls. One can only mediate if one is in contact with all sides, but we will do everything we can from our side to promote a national dialogue. In Lukashenko's Security Council meeting, the talk was of no talk. The leaders of the Western countries offer us negotiations, conversations, and at this time they continue to push their line. We can see it, we understand it, but we do not accept it. I want them to hear that. But those filling the streets across Belarus day and night are desperate for dialogue. One of their leaders told DW they want everyone to help. If it's possible that the EU states, the Russian Federation and Ukraine can help us to organise a dialogue within the country and with external partners so that a transfer of power happens and we listen to each other, I would always support it. This is a decisive moment for us. Decisive not only because Putin has remained tight-lipped, but decisive because they have the support of the European Union, and decisive because now their fear has gone.
And for more, let's bring in correspondent Nick Connolly, who is joining us from Minsk. Nick, what is the atmosphere among protesters? Do they sense change in the air?
Well, you definitely get a sense that people have lost their fear of coming out in the streets, simply because there are so many of them. I think there's a feeling that the regime here can't put all of them in jail. Having said that, there has been significant violence, protesters spending days in prison, in detention, about 30 people still unaccounted for days after they were taken in. But people are coming out, are voicing their dissatisfaction with the regime in a way that was unthinkable just a few weeks ago. The thing about these protests, they're very diffuse. There is no central protest camp. These protests erupt all across Minsk and all across the country and disappear as quickly as they begin. I think this is part of the strategy to make it more difficult for the security services here to come after people and to detain them. But there is a real sense that this is far from over. This is the beginning rather than the end of a process of coming out and voicing their dissatisfaction after 26 years with just one president.
And what kind of reaction has there been to the planned European sanctions?
Well, yesterday on the main square here in Minsk, where thousands of protesters were out for yet another protest in front of the government buildings, there was a sense that people had taken this to notice. They were happy to realize that Europe is watching and paying attention to these protests. I think it's more a symbolic step. It shows that Europe is solidaric to an extent with them without making any particularly strong promises. I think in terms of practical influence on the regime here, I don't think it will make that much of a difference. Lukashenko has been under sanctions time and time again, and those sanctions have then been withdrawn without him doing much in return. I think Alexander Lukashenko's government will have factored those in, but definitely on the symbol, on the kind of gesture politics side of things, that was an important step for people here on the streets to know that they are being watched and that the events here are being followed.
Nick, bring us up to date on where Russia stands in all of this, because it has traditionally been a very close ally of Lukashenko's.
Exactly. I mean, Belarus is Russia's closest ally. They are currently so-called union states. They have a kind of loose association, which Russia has always wanted to deepen, to further integrate Belarus into effectively one country with Russia. President Lukashenko has spoken to Vladimir Putin several times this week and been assured of Russia's willingness to support him should events escalate here. I think it's a difficult game for Lukashenko because he has tried to resist full integration with Russia. He fears that Russia will effectively take over and he will be left maybe only as some symbolic figurehead. The Russians for now are not saying that they will bring in troops. They are supporting the Lukashenko regime with advisors. Belarusian state TV yesterday, it was reported that many of the local journalists had been replaced with Russian journalists because the locals were no longer loyal to the regime. So I think it's about deniable support for the Lukashenko regime, not Russian tanks out in the streets of Minsk, but instead stuff that, events and support through people and resources that can shore up this regime without bringing that high diplomatic cost for the Kremlin, without coming out in kind of full-scale support with boots on the ground, as it were. That is what we're going to see in the next days and weeks.
Okay, so it's all very covert at this point. DW's Nick Connolly with The View from Minsk. Thank you, Nick.